Here it is, December 4th, 2021. I am here in Lake Superior on Madeline Island, and we've got Ontario, San Diego, and Minneapolis in the house. And I want to start out by saying that I had this sort of little mini revelation in the bathtub in one of my meditations. Imagine that. It was about mass formation, because as you may or may not know, I've been really digging into that and studying. I wrote a couple articles about it. I'll link them in the thing below. But and I remembered that Lily and I had read an article that I had written a couple of years ago for the Wisconsin Citizens Media Co-op about propaganda. And I did a lot of research into that article, partly because it began with Freud. Freud birthed this idea that his nephew then took and sort of experimented with and figured out how well it worked, the propaganda. And then it's just dominating our lives now. So she and I read that article I don't know how, whenever we read it, a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So in the bathtub, I was thinking, oh my God, Freud, original Party of 12 member. Have to go back and see what he says. I won't read the whole thing, but I did want to share a little bit about it, because one of the things that he says is, well, my purpose was to open doors. He talks about how he projected his own self onto the whole of humanity. Much like Adolf's projection of his lack of emotion, I projected my personal neuroses over the theories I was developing. The theories that he was developing, called psychology, the gist of what his fear was that human beings by nature were so dark and could be prone to such evil that he didn't know if humans could have control over themselves. So what he's saying in Party of 12 is that he realizes now that he's dead that he was projecting, because he had his own neurotic issues. And just because he wasn't going to be able to do it didn't mean that nobody was going to be able to do it. Instead of investigating further to see if we could cultivate the strength to take on changing culture, I took the embryonic idea, projected that everyone's inner life was as neurotic as mine, and concluded that humans were elementally weak. Then I found this little quote. I said, would you change anything about psychotherapy knowing what you know now? He said, I believe the idea is for psychotherapy to evolve into what is truly was always meant to do, a roadmap inward to complete self-responsibility. When that happens, psychology will become obsolete. Psychology will then become the needless vaccine to eradicate illness when we have mastered self-healing. So that felt like a little bit of a sign of some sort to me. Thank you, Sigmund. And then there's all sorts of other great things, but I just wanted to share that one with you. So let's begin, though, by connecting on that non-physical level together. So just to be able to sit back, all of us, and close our eyes and take some deep breaths. And I learned that if you want to brighten your mind, take long breath inward and then a short exhale. And we will command that only the most divine light shine down upon you at this time, and the greatest good be present here. We are so pleased to be gathered with you today. There is so much that is going on. We have so much to talk about. We want to make sure that we remain in our honor and articulation, fueled and guided with compassion, to share with you this vision that we've been having for quite some time now. And you who have gathered here today, and those who will listen afterwards, we are moving into a fuller, deeper, richer place together. We've been moving together like this for several years intentionally, and all of that movement is paying off. It's paying off first and foremost for each of you individually. You are seeing what your life is when you do the work of self-love and self-care. Because when you do not align yourself that way to your life, you see the results of the imbalance almost immediately. When you're in that imbalance, such as some are physically right now, there is such great masterful manifestation of purpose, even in that condition that you're dealing with. But there is also a view and a process that extends it further. And that view has to do with the structure that we're showing you here in this map of human consciousness. Because to understand the pieces of who you are in this new way gives you a new power. It gives you a leg up into this evolutionary place we've been coaching you along to become, that you've been working with us in partnership to consciously watch as this birthing takes place. If you think of the birthing of the new human consciousness, that human beings up until this time had one particular structure of DNA that guided its humanity's progression. And suddenly, we say suddenly, in the past 100 years, since Sigmund Freud began turning people inward in a way that was going to be ultimately coming to where you are doing it today, this inward motion has made huge changes. The structures of, if you're looking for a biblical term, those who built their house upon the sand, all the structures that really aren't truly based in compassion are being challenged. And the kind of changes that you're seeing externally, such as people being displaced, people being homeless, the economic flows, everything is being disrupted because of this evolutionary step. We have been preparing you for as long as we've been working with you to be here in this time, very specifically to not just hold the space of change. It's very important for you and us, is that you hold that space despite any kind of degeneration of the culture around you that you see taking place, the crumbling of Rome, if you will. How you navigate yourself through this holding what you know to be true, gathering your power to the greatest extent that you can, because it's well needed right now. The beautiful part about it is that challenges you creatively as well, because all of you want to support this movement. All of you want to know how to support it. And you know the importance of self-love. You know that's how you support it. That when you are in self-love and you're truly not trapped in your intellectual stories of the past or backward, not allowing what you think as backward trauma to project into the future. Each and every one of you has had your own little journey to how you do that for yourself. And that's how it's supposed to be. Each human is supposed to design their own self-care plan. This is part of the breaking of addiction to pharmaceuticals. It's part of the breaking of the addictions. And that's millions and millions and millions and millions of people. Some will, some won't. In the process, if you learn how to break your dependency upon the corporate Western medicine way of life, and you pull off into your own really solo self-care journey, it doesn't mean you're alone. You have all kinds of resources, but that you're the one that's telling yourself what to do. You're the one that's saying you should do this at a particular time or that at a particular time, not someone else dictating your care, that you do this once a year, you do this twice a year, you do this, you do this, you do this, even when you don't want to do it. That is part of mass formation. Bringing Sigmund Freud into the conversation was appropriate. The statement that this work is meant to retire itself. There's a day where your system is so running so sustainably. You know who all your resources are. You know how to follow your intuition. And you follow your intuition. And you operate from compassion. And it's just who you are, how you relate to that world around you. Then you don't need a coach. You don't need a doctor to lead you. You don't need even a teacher. But that doesn't mean you won't want them. That doesn't mean you won't work in conjunction with people and resources. But you are truly then your own sovereign leader of your life. It's a wise leader who uses their resources well. And we're here to help you understand better how to use those resources that you have. Part of what took place in Germany in the 30s was so revolutionary that people would never have even begun to understand it without Sigmund Freud. After Germany was defeated in World War I, that was the time for them of no meaning in life, of isolated. So many people too were killed. Record number, unbelievable numbers. The Great War killed unbelievable numbers of people for what? They were also had their free-floating anxiety, but the free-floating anxiety that everyone human experiences is the very reason why we were impelled to come and do this journey with you in the first place. Because to project your anxiety or project your neurosis, as Freud was admitting to, is not going to break you out of the mass formation. The way to open up some light into it is to study how it happened before and then be able to identify how it's happening now. And these are important times, and these are important conversations for you to be having. Because back then, when they were in such defeat and loss and anger, and who are they going to blame? In came the Nazi Party with the propaganda and the narrative and the bullying and the really, you don't go against the narrative. It's dangerous to go against the narrative. Those people, those 40% of the people who could clearly see that 7 of the 8 answers were wrong. Clearly, that line was not the same length as that line. But knowing the dynamic of human potential to do what Freud suggested, one makes choices for other reasons than just the truth. People make those choices to be able to protect themselves and protect their family. There's a kind of a need to hypnotize and to anesthetize under those circumstances. And that's part of why intellectual thinking gets jammed up when you're in mass formation. You have a hard time thinking rationally. You can only, like a hypnotized person, you can only hear the words of the strategy that's going to keep you safe, and then you implement it. And in this case of, say, 2021 COVID, the horrors are so impacting on top of the conditions that were ripe for mass formation in the first place, that all of the rational functioning can be instantly cut off. And you may not even know it. You people being so committed to being so aware of self, you can clearly see that you're not immune, but that only makes you more adamant about being aware. If you take this example and then put it into your own personal inner world, on the other side of the physical, in the non-physical part, the part that is where your little squirrel voice lives, and you put this analogy that this virus is indeed those voices of culture that are trying to break you down. If your intuition or your body is telling you to rest, and there's any kind of voice in your head that is arguing, that is the inner voice of those outer representations. It is there that you deal with your own viruses because of where you are in your development now, your thorough commitment to being your own witness, to being your own observer. Because of where you are now, you are able to make great strides quickly when you really turn and apply so deeply to yourself. We're in this circle here reminiscing about those times in Germany. For so many reasons, the Party of 12 was constructed with this in mind, a circle of elders who have been there and done that, literally, who can shed some light. First and foremost, they would like to say that there is so much power here to change history. There's so much personal power that each of you have to change history. Imagine if that the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many of you are listening to these words, that you all recognize together a need that the world had, and that you all, if you could come together with your resources, could do that. And imagine that instead of getting up in the morning and running off out the door, or having to deal with family members, or having to deal with clients, imagine that You set aside time very specifically to study, like you were going to college or going to school. Only you were going to spend 5 or 6 hours a day focused in this intention of what you're trying to accomplish together, however that looked. Imagine the difference in your body right now between the way you are living right now. And we're not criticizing anyone, how anyone's living. We're just drawing a comparison so that you can see that even though a large percentage of your intellect knows and thinks and believes you have that power, there is sometimes a lack of understanding about how to motivate yourself to use it to as deeply as you can. And part of it is that for all of you who are listening to this, you've been studying this for so long that there's kind of a fear of power ahead. There's still that fear of that the intellect tries to articulate from just an emotion of fear. This process would unbreak some bonds that you haven't quite been able to get to. And this is an ongoing part of evolution. So it's sort of like a blind spot. It's not something that happens and then it's over. It's something that you do on a regular basis as a human. So here you are, sovereign in your own world with just you, and anybody that you hear or see outside you being a metaphor or a projection until they actually physically appear. Let us explain. If you were to embark upon a sort of a dream time exercise, like we've put you through before, where you try to meet each other in your dreams, and you do certain things while you're going to sleep at night, and you focus and you intend, and you do this so that you can break down the barriers that your perception has about being able to go do this, because you can. You're in the clarity now together. You're always in the clarity together. Always. And it's breaking down the barriers between the physical world and the bigger operating system of who you are in those moments. This exploration is leading you to a new configuration. It's a part of evolution where, for whatever reason, the compassion, of course, which is impelling the evolutionary steps, needs community. There's an awakening to consciously being in a bigger community together and creating relationships with each other that are going to be heart to heart, that are going to be challenging trust, that might be triggering, but are with people who are so committed that the platforms can be trusted, the places where you are at, because all of you have worked so hard to become so self-aware, all the places that you are at are moving forward as well. And you need to prepare to receive that. One of the things that you'll want to receive is the creative force, the creative energy, the energy that gives your life meaning. That is the energy we want you to seek. And you can seek that energy in any situation that culture is giving you. What is that energy? And how will you become it? Now, there's some conversation a bit about the importance of all the range of emotion. There are some who feel as if there is a range that is somehow detrimental to manifestation. And there are others who hold the belief that the whole entire range of emotion is absolutely necessary in order for a physical body to be created and have this experience of seeing the physical world, projecting and then perceiving the physical world, to be that person. What's important to know is we're not suggesting that people get trapped in self-perpetuating suffering, because there is a condition that you get in where you have an emotion and it triggers a thought process or patterns and pictures that then, by allowing and going in with your imagination, going into that story again with that emotion, you're bringing it to life, thereby making the emotion even more intense. So it's like a abscessed, what an emotional abscess looks like. It's the intellect with the story that's keeping the emotion defined as something, and then they keep triggering each other. When you shift your whole perception and think, wait, this energy, it's like electricity, you don't want to put your finger in it. Hurts, electricity, but it does so much when it's used correctly, safely. And the same is true of any of the relatively uncomfortable and negative feelings, is that if you can successfully channel that through new and sacred thought processes, higher thinking, not get trapped on putting that free flowing anxiety onto some outer object that then you don't have any control over, and then that triggers, and it's a cycle. So to embrace and breathe and transcend that cyclic thought process, fill yourself into that bigger, more powerful person that you are, and stand up and take responsibility for the power that you know you have, and stop pretending that you don't have that power. Stop pretending that anything outside you is holding you back. Stop pretending that anybody else is the source of any emotion that you have. Stop pretending that you're not here to become that very change. And those are the places you're seeking out, because they exist within your system. If you consider the map of human consciousness and that compassion, the fifth fundamental force of the universe, it is the intelligence that uses the four fundamental forces to impel the creation of the physical world one step at a time. And out of the nothing and into the something comes your own one compilation of consciousness into the source. And the source then provides a structure of a gravitational wave that flows from that source up through the earth to the surface of the planet, to the lens. And into that lens, the human body is created with the consciousness to perceive it, to project and perceive the entire universe. And that gravitational wave continues back on and becomes again much more part of the earth as it goes down through the North Pole and into the center of the earth to begin again. And in that first step out of the source, out of compassion, into what's going to be the entire universe, emotion is a fluid space of energy starting to come together. And as it flows up, And it divides from 1 to 2, and sound is born, and intuition is created. The voice of compassion within you, impelling you to take a step for the good of the whole. And with all of that, onward flows the evolutionary step into the third, which is the intellect, defining everything in your world. Out of that comes the lens, where all the manifestation takes place, where everything that you experience that seems so broad and vast, the whole universe exists. And yet look at the entire mechanism. It's just one piece of the whole of who you are. So on a very practical level, we want to continue to inspire you to take such great steps to be so self-aware. Because right now, your culture is going through a similar experience as ours did back then. We had no idea either about how such horrific activity could have taken place. And for Sigmund, it was just proof that his theories were absolutely correct. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as the case may be, that ideology did lead to the discovery of psychological understanding, going deeper in. It's almost as if the Holocaust forced an even deeper examination of the nature of the human being. So there's been so much work. And the good news is that the work that you do, the work that you are putting into the world right now, trying to be the change, is the very thing that is needed to break the bonds and to create a sacred space, a safe space of true compassion that can be replicated by each individual. So it's not about the space that you create, it's that you create that space, thereby becoming that shining light. And together, you have a lot of power, and you're going to be asked to use it in the weeks and months ahead to come up with some creative ways to create this association and this working structure that can serve as an attraction for those who need to be reminded of who they really are. So, with all of that said, we would ask if there's any questions or conversation.
Hi,
Yes.
that was very helpful to put it in what's happening now in the bigger context of what happened after the First War and what happened in Germany leading to the Second War. I trust we're not going into another war. I don't believe we are, but that was helpful to expand the understanding of mass formation, which I also have been looking at and agreeing with, I guess, if you want to put it that way. What Dr. Desmond did say in the interview I saw was that mass formation situations like totalitarianism and so on eventually self-destruct, and it isn't usually pretty when that happens, because people wake up and turn on those leaders or whoever that told them to do, whatever, to lock down, to get vaccinated, whatever the situation. How might that play out here, I wonder? People will wake up to what's been going on and see through it And I guess that's where we come in to teach that it's self. It's self, the ability to respond to what's going on within our own systems rather than projecting again.
Well, and it's also to be information, to keep your truth solid, so that whatever level of conversation or situation that you're in, you're going to be in a world which has been succumbed by mass formation. That is what's happening. It is a war. It is a different kind of war. That's the sort of the good news, because there's a different kind of approach to this war. And it's not necessarily fighting something head on. It's creating a sacred, safe space that others who need to be attracted to it and drawn to can be. Then how you provide that space, whether it's finding a larger group of people who are doing something specific, or supporting others who are on the front lines taking the hit to get the information above and beyond the mass formation. We've always felt that the basics of mass formation are the very same things that we were addressing when we began teaching with Barbara and Lily and Teresa. We were teaching that simple idea that this thing outside of you is not the source of how you feel or what you think. And that if you mistakenly think that, then there's certain things that you're going to engage in order to address it. Just like if you think a country is your enemy, you're going to think about engaging in a war with it, because you have to. The strategy is then to destroy it, because that's the object of the transgression or the anxiety, what have you, the conflict. And we've always said that's just like trying to look in the mirror and change clothes by drawing something on the mirror. They are reflections of you. And this teaching and training is what is so important right now, as we started out saying, that people are going to come off the Western medical system. They already are. They're being challenged to break their addiction to the Western medicine system, which includes this idea that pharmaceutical drugs are the answer to their generalized issues. Figure out, what does that mean then? How do you build a system for yourself that's going to replace that? For many of you who are listening to this, you've already done this. This is nothing to you. This is how you live. But there are millions and millions of people who need to know what that would look like. Maybe what wasn't so interesting 5 years ago to people is much more interesting now, because whether people know it or not, they have to decide what they believe is going on. And the answer is always self-care. It's always starts with you. So that kind of guidance, whether it be a very specific, you're going to take up some sort of activity, coaching, what have you, or even if you're just going to continue to keep yourself educated and sort of stocked with good information that you can use in conversation, that you can hold as truth, and not be lulled by the tendency to fall asleep in these times.
Thank you. That's helpful because it's always helpful to just come back to the self-care and to encourage others to do that, because otherwise it's exhausting just thinking about trying to help people the way I grew up being told, or many of us, you do for people rather than encourage them to do for themselves. Even though I tried to do that with my own kids, and still the boys, they're all in their 40s now, still find myself, wanting to do for and fighting myself against that, with those different ways.
Well, and that's a situation where, as we said, when you don't self-care, you suffer, even if it's just little things, not listening to intuition, or in your case, perhaps falling back to the pattern that you were there to take care at your expense. Once again, part of evolution is going through this and getting stronger.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm wondering, you mentioned the receiving the creative force that gives life meaning and to keep seeking that energy and becoming it. I would just love you to expand on that. Like, what are some of the ways to do that, get aligned with that, receive it?
Part of aligning to it is really an intentional effort. It's very easy for a human to get into a pattern of comfort, and the comfort doesn't even have to feel good sometimes, but being uncomfortable is sometimes comfortable for people. If you're somewhat comfortable, you're not driven by a sense of lack, and you're set, let's see, in your ways, set in your patterns, this is much harder to find that creative force than if you're hungry, or if you're suffering, if you're really have some kind of discomfortable conflict that you need to resolve in order to feel better. And that's what we're trying to help evolve, is that so you don't have to go through conflict in order to, say, get some space from someone, that you don't have to go through giving up of yourself in order to be that strong person that you need to be for yourself. Ways in which to nurture creativity begin with the intention. And we strongly feel that spending that focused time on exploring, what does creativity mean to you? What is the nature of how you create? There's a meditative, intuitive intention setting that can go into diving into emotion. Emotion is really the root of creativity. And if you think about it, compassion, it being the fifth fundamental force of the universe, is all about creation and regeneration. It mysteriously creates this compilation of consciousness that's you. The first step towards form is emotion. So emotion is really the foundation of your compassion, and then intuition becomes the voice of that emotion. So to really get into a creative flow, going into that emotion is helpful. Being willing to abide the discomfort of not knowing. It's a part of what breaks down creative energy, is the intellect always trying to define and defend sometimes, or question what creative energy is and such. So really getting way out of it, of the intellect, and into a deeper emotional place can drive that as well. And repetitive intention setting, repetitive about leading a more creative life, and finding those creative channels and seeking it out like you might a partner, if you were so inclined to really want to find that life. And then sometimes just doing things randomly that don't maybe have a lot of meaning, just to remind yourself that creativity isn't a painting necessarily. It certainly can be, but it's also about how you apply creativity to your life and to deal with the conflicts of your life as well.
Thank you.
We're going to bring the channel to a close and say that in the history of the party and the association that you're all here today to be a part of, there's been a lot of foreplanning. All those many years ago, we couldn't have explained to you how important having advisors like Einstein, Freud, and Hitler would be to understanding and having insight into what's going on in your lives right now. And we're humbled and awed, honored, and grateful that you come and share in these discussions and listen to our words. And we are going to come more and talk more. And we hope that these conversations will help guide and inspire and uplift. And if anything, will instigate the actions that you need to self-care, to self-love, and to stand in your truth and own your power. And when you do that, you will indeed watch and be amazed. Namaste.